They thought sending her to the Alpha's estate was a death sentence. They thought he would tear her apart before the first night was over. Genevieve's sisters didn't just want her gone. They wanted her erased. But they made a fatal mistake. They didn't realize that the monster living in the Blackwood mansion wasn't looking for a victim. He was hunting for a queen. And when the Alpha King looks at the servant girl they threw to the wolves, he doesn't see a maid. He sees the one thing that can bring him to his knees. This is the story of betrayal, forbidden desire, and a bond that burns hotter than vengeance. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. In the Caldwell household, the atmosphere was thicker than the storm outside. Genevieve Caldwell was on her knees, the harsh bristles of a scrubbing brush turning her knuckles raw and red. The smell of bleach stung her nose, but it wasn't strong enough to mask the scent of expensive cloying perfume wafting from the living room. "It has to be her," Beatrice said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was pacing the worn Persian rug, clutching a thick envelope stamped with a wax seal of a wolf's head. "The contract explicitly says a Caldwell daughter. It doesn't specify which daughter. But he's a beast, B." Loretta whined from the velvet armchair, checking her manicure. "They say the last assistant Dominic Blackwood hired lasted 3 days before she ran screaming into the woods. Some say he didn't just fire her. Some say he hunted her." Genevieve stopped scrubbing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Dominic Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Pacific Northwest. In the human world, he was a billionaire recluse, a venture capitalist who owned half the city's skyline. In Clear's Throat, the shadow world, the world Genevieve's family existed on the fringes of, he was the apex predator, a lichen whose bloodline was so old and violent lesser wolves couldn't look him in the eye without submitting. "We aren't going," Beatrice declared, slamming the letter onto the coffee table. She turned her cold blue eyes toward the hallway where Genevieve was kneeling. "But we are fulfilling the contract. Dad's gambling debts are with the Blackwood pack. If we don't send someone to serve out the debt term, they take the house. They take everything." Genevieve stood up, wiping her hands on her stained apron. She was 22 with hair the color of roasted chestnuts and eyes that were a strange shifting hazel. She was small, often overlooked, the product of her father's second marriage to a woman the sisters despised. Since her parents died, she had been less of a sister and more of an indentured servant. "You want to send me to Blackwood Manor?" Genevieve asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "To work off a debt I didn't create? You're a Caldwell," Loretta sneered, standing up to tower over her. "Technically, besides, look at you, you're used to cleaning up messes. Beatrice and I, we have prospects. We have suitors from the Miller pack coming next week. We can't be scrubbing floors for a rabid alpha. If I go," Genevieve said quietly, "the deed to the house is signed over to me when I return. That's the deal." Beatrice laughed, a harsh barking sound. "If you return, little sister, if you return." The drive to the Blackwood estate took 3 hours, winding deep into the evergreen forests of the Olympic Peninsula. The car wasn't a family sedan. It was a blacked-out SUV sent by the pack. The driver, a massive man named Garrison, who Genevieve assumed was the beta, hadn't spoken a single word since he picked her up. Genevieve clutched her small duffel bag. She wore the clothes her sisters had forced on her, a drab, shapeless gray dress that smelled faintly of mothballs. They had doused her in verbena spray before she left, claiming it was to mask the scent of poverty. But Genevieve knew it was to irritate a wolf's sensitive nose. They wanted her to fail. They wanted the alpha to snap. The gates of the estate loomed like the entrance to a fortress. Iron bars, 20 ft high, swung open silently. The driveway was lined with ancient pines that seemed to lean in whispering warnings. The house itself was a sprawling architectural marvel of stone and glass perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the churning gray ocean. Garrison parked the car and killed the engine. The silence was deafening. "Rules," Garrison said, his voice like gravel grinding together. It was the first time he had spoken. Genevieve flinched. "Yes. 1. Do not look him in the eye unless he speaks to you. 2. Do not enter the west wing after sundown. 3. If you hear a growling, you do not run. If you run, his instinct will be to chase, and if he chases, he will catch you." Genevieve swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I understand. Get out." She stepped onto the gravel, the wind whipping her hair across her face. The front door opened, and a severe-looking older woman in a housekeeper's uniform stepped out. This was Mrs. Holloway. She looked at Genevieve with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You're small," Mrs. Holloway noted, looking her up and down. "The last one was a fitness instructor. She didn't make it. Come on, girl, he's waiting in the study." Genevieve was marched through halls that smelled of cedar, old leather, and something else. Something wild and electric like the air right before a lightning strike. The house was cold, modern, and impeccably clean, devoid of any warmth. They reached a set of double mahogany doors. Mrs. Holloway knocked once, then opened the door and shoved Genevieve inside, closing it firmly behind her. The study was dimly lit only by the fireplace and the gray light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. A massive oak desk sat in the center of the room. Behind it sat a man. Dominic Blackwood did not look up from the documents he was signing. Clear's throat, Genevieve stood frozen near the door. The energy in the room was suffocating. It felt heavy, pressing down on her shoulders. This was the alpha aura she had heard about in stories, the sheer pressure of his dominance. He was wearing a charcoal suit, the jacket discarded on a chair. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin and the edge of a dark tattoo. His hair was black, thick, and slightly messy as if he had been running his fingers through it in frustration. "You smell like cheap verbena and fear." His voice was a low baritone that vibrated in Genevieve's chest. He slowly lifted his head. Genevieve forgot the first rule. She looked him in the eye. His eyes were terrifying. They were a piercing luminous amber rimmed with dark gray. They weren't human eyes. They were the eyes of a wolf looking out through a man's face. Dominic paused. The pen in his hand snapped in half with a loud crack. Ink splattered onto the pristine paperwork. He stood up, his movement fluid and predatory. He was tall, well over 6'4", with broad shoulders that blocked out the firelight. He walked around the desk, stalking toward her. Genevieve wanted to back away, but her feet were rooted to the spot. Dominic stopped inches from her. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. A frown creased his forehead. He looked confused, almost stunned. The verbena her sisters had drenched her in was doing its job. It was burning his senses, hiding her natural scent. "Who are you?" he growled, the sound rumbling from deep within his chest. "Genevieve," she whispered. "Genevieve Caldwell. I'm here to work off the debt." He leaned in closer, invading her personal space. The heat radiating off him was intense, like standing next to a furnace. He tilted his head, sniffing the air near her neck. Genevieve trembled. "Caldwell," he muttered as if the name tasted bad. "The gamblers." He back abruptly, turning his back on her. "You are not what I ordered. I wanted a worker, not a fragile child doused in weed killer." "I can work," Genevieve said, finding a spark of courage. "I've worked my whole life. I'm not afraid of hard labor." Dominic turned his head slightly, looking at her over his shoulder. "It is not the labor you should fear, Miss Caldwell. It is the company." He walked to the window, staring out at the storm. "Mrs. Holloway will show you to your quarters. Stay out of my way. If I smell that perfume on you again, I will throw you out into the storm myself." Genevieve turned to the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. "Wait," he commanded. She froze. "Why are you really here?" he asked, his voice softer, now laced with suspicion. Clear's throat. "No father sends his daughter to this house unless he hates her." "He didn't send me," Genevieve admitted softly. "My sisters did." Dominic made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snarl. "Wolves in sheep's clothing. Go, before I change my mind." Genevieve fled the room. Inside the study, Dominic Blackwood leaned his forehead against the cold glass of the window. His heart was racing, pounding a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Beneath the stench of verbena, he had caught a whiff of something else, something sweet like vanilla and rain. He gripped the window frame until the wood groaned. It can't be, he thought. Not her, not a human. For the first 2 weeks, Genevieve existed as a ghost in the Blackwood estate. Her routine was grueling. She woke at 4:00 a.m. to prep the kitchen for the chef, then spent the day dusting the massive library, polishing silver and scrubbing floors that were already clean. Mrs. Holloway was a harsh taskmaster, constantly checking Genevieve's work for imperfections. "The alpha demands perfection," Mrs. Holloway would say, running a white-gloved finger over a mantelpiece. "One speck of dust is an insult to his senses." Genevieve learned quickly that the alpha's senses were not a myth. One morning, she had used a lemon-scented polish in the hallway. 10 minutes later, she heard a roar from the upper landing. Dominic had stormed down, eyes glowing, demanding to know why the house smelled like chemical acid. She did everything she could to remain invisible. She showered 3 times a day with unscented soap to remove the verbena her sisters had doused her in and to ensure she had no scent at all. She wore her hair in a tight bun and kept her eyes on the floor, but she could feel him watching her. Sometimes, when she was polishing the grand staircase, she would feel a prickle on the back of her neck. She would glance up to see Dominic standing on the balcony above a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, his amber eyes tracking her movement with an intensity that made her skin burn. He never spoke, just watched, like a predator studying a new element in its territory. The twist came on a Tuesday. It was late past midnight. Genevieve had been tasked with organizing the archives in the library, a job that had taken hours. Her back ached and she was exhausted. As she gathered her cleaning supplies to head to the servants' quarters, a crash echoed from the West Wing. Rule 2. Do not enter the West Wing after sundown. Genevieve froze. Silence followed the crash. Then a low, agonizing groan. It sounded human, yet not. She knew she should walk away. Garrison had been explicit, but the sound came again, a sound of pure suffering. Genevieve's nature, the part of her that had nursed her sick mother for years, overrode her fear. She set down her bucket and crept toward the heavy oak doors that separated the main house from the West Wing. The hallway beyond was dark, the air frigid. She followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. Inside, the room was in shambles. Furniture was overturned. Deep claw marks gouged the plaster walls. In the center of the room, curled into a ball on the floor, was Dominic. He was shirtless, his skin slick with sweat. His muscles were spasming, cords of tension snapping under his skin. He was growling, a continuous rumbling sound of pain. "Get out," he rasped, his voice distorted. He didn't look up, but he sensed her. "Run, you foolish girl." Genevieve saw the problem. On the table nearby was a syringe and a shattered vial. He had been trying to administer medicine suppressants, she realized, and had failed before the change began to take hold. The moon wasn't full, but for an alpha of his power, emotions could trigger a shift. And right now, he was fighting a losing battle against his wolf. "You need this," Genevieve whispered. She stepped into the room, moving toward the table. "Don't come closer," Dominic roared, lifting his head. His face was contorted, his teeth lengthening into fangs. His eyes were fully gold, no white visible. "I will kill you." "No, you won't," she said, her voice shaking but determined. She grabbed a fresh vial from the case on the floor. She had seen her father, a diabetic, prep needles 1,000 times. Her hands moved on autopilot. She drew the clear liquid into the syringe. Dominic swiped a massive hand at her, his claws extending. He missed her by an inch, shredding the hem of her gray dress. "Dominic, look at me," she commanded. It was the first time she had used his name. The authority in her voice shocked him just enough to make him pause. In that split second, Genevieve lunged. She didn't hesitate. She jammed the needle into his upper arm and depressed the plunger. Dominic howled, a sound that shook the windows. He grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising, threatening to snap her bones. He pulled her down, pinning her to the floor beneath him. Genevieve gasped, staring up into the face of a monster. He was heavy, his body burning hot. His breath hit her face, hot and erratic. He snarled, lowering his face to her throat. She could feel the sharp points of his canines grazing her pulse point. She closed her eyes, waiting for the bite, but it didn't come. Clear's throat. Dominic froze. With her right against him, the unscented soap she used was useless. He could smell her, really smell her. Beneath the fear, beneath the cleaning supplies, rain, vanilla, home. The wolf inside him, which had been raging for blood, suddenly went still. It didn't want to kill this creature. It wanted to protect her. It wanted to rub against her. Dominic's breathing slowed. The gold in his eyes receded, revealing the human iris. He blinked, looking down at the woman he had pinned to the floor. She was terrified, tears leaking from her eyes, but she hadn't run. He slowly released her wrist. He saw the red marks his fingers had left on her pale skin, and a look of horror crossed his face. He rolled off her, backing away until his back hit the wall. He pulled his knees to his chest, breathing heavily. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, his voice rough. Genevieve sat up, rubbing her wrist. "Ideally, I'd say no, but yes, you have a strong grip." Dominic let out a dark chuckle, running a hand over his face. "You have a death wish, Genevieve Caldwell." "You were in pain," she said simply. "I am dangerous," he countered. "You broke the rules." "Rules are for people who want to stay safe," she said, standing up on shaky legs. "I just wanted you to stay alive." She turned to leave, but Dominic spoke again. "Why is your scent different?" Genevieve paused at the door. "I don't know what you mean. It's quiet," he murmured, looking at her with a renewed intense curiosity. "But when I was close to you, it was the only thing that made the noise in my head stop." He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time, not as a servant, but as a woman. "Tomorrow," he said, his tone shifting back to the alpha command, though softer this time. "You will not clean the floors. You will work in my study. I need someone to manage my personal correspondence." "But Mrs. Holloway said I am the king," Dominic said, his eyes flashing gold for a second. "I say where you work. Good night, Genevieve." Genevieve walked back to her room, her heart pounding faster than it had during the attack. She touched her neck where his teeth had grazed her skin. It tingled. She didn't know that back in the West Wing, Dominic was picking up the empty syringe she had used. He brought it to his nose, inhaling the lingering scent of her hand. Pulled his phone out of his pocket and dialed a number. "Garrison," he said into the phone. "Run a full background check on Genevieve Caldwell. I want to know everything. Her bloodline, her parents, and specifically who her grandmother was. Something isn't adding up." The transition from scrubbing floors to managing the private affairs of the Alpha King was jarring. Genevieve's new workspace was a small antique desk tucked into the corner of Dominic's massive study. The air here didn't smell of bleach. It smelled of old paper, rich mahogany, and the ever-present intoxicating scent of Dominic himself, a mix of forest rain and something akin to smoldering wood embers. Dominic was not an easy boss. He was demanding, expecting her to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. He would pace the room while dictating emails to rival pack leaders, his energy so volatile that the air around him seemed to shimmer. Yet he was no longer the distant beast. He watched her constantly. If she shivered because the room was drafty, the fireplace would suddenly roar to life. If she skipped lunch to finish filing, a plate of gourmet food would appear on her desk without a word. It was a possessive sort of care, territorial, and silent. Genevieve found herself studying him in return. She saw the way the weight of his kingdom sat heavy on his shoulders. He was the king of the entire Pacific Northwest territory, responsible for maintaining peace between warring factions of shifters while keeping their existence hidden from humanity. He was ruthless, calculating, and incredibly lonely. The tension between them was a living thing, coiling tighter with every passing day. When they brushed hands exchanging papers, a jolt of static electricity strong enough to sting would pass between them. Dominic would growl low in his throat, and Genevieve's breath would hitch. The real test came with the announcement of the Winter Solstice Gala. It was the most important political event on the shifter calendar, a night where alliances were forged and broken. "You need a companion for the evening, Alpha," Garrison stated one afternoon, standing stiffly by Dominic's desk. "Lady Isabella from the Southern Pride has expressed interest. It would be a strategic match." Dominic sneered, not looking up from the map he was studying. "Isabella is a viper in silk. I don't need strategy. I need peace." His amber eyes suddenly snapped toward Genevieve, who was quietly organizing files in the corner. "Genevieve will attend with me." Garrison's stoic mask cracked. "So Miss Caldwell is human, she is staff. Bringing her into a room full of high-ranking predatory shifters is unwise. It will be seen as an insult to the unmated female alphas." "Let them be insulted," Dominic said coldly. "She is already in the middle of this world. It's time she saw the teeth behind the smiles." Besides, he stood up, walking over to Genevieve's desk, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "I don't like leaving her alone in this house." Genevieve looked up, her hazel eyes meeting his intense golden gaze. "You want me to go to a werewolf ball? It's a gala, Genevieve. Try not to trip." Word reached Seattle fast. Beatrice and Loretta Caldwell were furious. They had sent their stepsister to be broken to become a drudge whose spirit would be crushed by the alpha beast. Instead, they heard rumors from pack associates that she was living in the main house, working as his personal secretary, and now attending the Solstice Gala on his arm. "She's manipulating him," Beatrice spat, throwing a vase across their shabby living room. "That little mouse is playing a game she doesn't understand. We have to go," Loretta said, her eyes narrowing. "The Miller Pack Alpha owes Dad a favor. He can get us invitations. We need to remind everyone, especially Blackwood, exactly what Genevieve is. Trash." The night of the gala, Genevieve felt like an imposter. Mrs. Holloway, whose demeanor had softened slightly since Genevieve's promotion, had provided a dress. It wasn't a fairy tale gown. It was a weapon. It was a deep midnight blue silk that clung to her curves, sophisticated and severe. When she descended the grand staircase, Dominic was waiting at the bottom. He wore a tuxedo that seemed unable to contain the raw power radiating off him. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment his breath stopped. The wolf inside him clawed at his ribs, demanding to claim to mark. He shoved the instinct down with brutish mental force. "Adequate," he muttered as she reached the bottom step, though his eyes burned with a different message entirely. He offered his arm. "Stay close to me tonight. Do not wander." Some of these guests bite. The gala was held in a massive ballroom in downtown Seattle, secured by pack guards. The air was thick with the sense of hundreds of shifters, musk, spice, and aggression. When Dominic entered with Genevieve on his arm, the room went silent. The stares were predatory. She felt like a gazelle walking into a lion's den. High-ranking she-wolves glared at her with undisguised hatred, wondering why the Alpha King brought a weak human instead of choosing one of them. Dominic kept her glued to his side, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The heat of his palm burned through the silk of her dress. Then the Caldwell sisters arrived. Beatrice and Loretta swept in dressed in flashy, expensive gowns they couldn't afford. They spotted Genevieve immediately and cut through the crowd like sharks sensing blood in the water. "Well, well," Beatrice said loudly, drawing the attention of the surrounding alphas. "Look at this, Loretta. Our little Cinderella thinks she's part of the royalty." Genevieve stiffened. Dominic went rigid beside her, a low vibration starting in his chest. "Beatrice, Loretta," Genevieve said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What are you doing here? We came to save the king from embarrassment." Loretta sneered, looking up at Dominic coquettishly. "Alpha Blackwood, surely you know this girl is nothing but a maid. Her father was a gambling drunk. Her mother was a nobody. She's just here to pay off a debt. It's insulting to your guests to parade her around like an equal." The surrounding wolves murmured. This was a direct challenge to Dominic's judgment. Dominic didn't even look at the sisters. He looked down at Genevieve, whose face was pale with humiliation. He slowly removed his hand from her back and stepped forward, placing himself between Genevieve and her sisters. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His alpha aura rolled out like a tidal wave, forcing lesser wolves to lower their heads. "You mistake my patience for tolerance," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Genevieve Caldwell is under my protection. She is part of my household. An insult to her is a direct challenge to me." He took a step toward Beatrice, who suddenly looked very small. And I do not tolerate challenges from bottom feeders. Get out of my sight before I forget that I am civilized. The sisters fled pale and trembling. Dominic turned back to Genevieve, taking her hand. In front of everyone, the entire hierarchy of the shifter world, he raised a hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. It was a declaration. It was madness. Let them talk, he murmured against her skin, his eyes blazing. They don't matter. The drive back to the estate was suffocating. The air in the SUV was thick enough to choke on. The incident with the sisters had stripped away the pretenses. Dominic was no longer just her boss. He was her defender, and Genevieve wasn't just his employee. She was something he was willing to humiliate an entire room of powerful shifters for. They didn't speak. Genevieve sat rigid, her hand still burning where he had kissed it. Dominic stared out the window, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He was fighting a losing battle against his biology. Every time the car went around a curve and their thighs brushed a fresh wave of his scent, heavy with arousal and possessiveness, filled the space. When they arrived back at the manor, the storm from weeks ago seemed to have returned. Rain lashed against the stone walls. They entered the grand foyer. Genevieve turned to go to her room, desperate to escape the unbearable tension. Genevieve, she stopped. She didn't turn around. Yes, Alpha. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but he stood so close she could feel the heat coming off his body. Why didn't you fight back? He demanded, his voice rough. Your sisters. Why do you let them treat you like that? She turned slowly. Because they're all I have left of a family, because I'm used to it. You shouldn't be. He growled, his restraint snapping. He reached out his large hands, cupping her face. The contact was electrifying. You are worth 1,000 of them. Don't you see that his thumbs traced her cheekbones? He was looking at her not as a king, but as a starving man looks at a feast. Dominic. She whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. What are we doing? I'm human. You're you. I don't care what you are. He rasped, lowering his head. I only know that when you aren't near me, I feel like I'm suffocating. And when you are near me, he didn't finish the sentence. He crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was hunger and desperation and years of loneliness crashing together. Genevieve gasped, and he used the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, tasting her. She should have pushed him away. He was a monster, a killer, a king of a world she didn't belong to, but her body betrayed her. She melted into him, her hands gripping the lapels of his tuxedo. He groaned against her mouth, pulling her hips against his. The sheer size and power of him was overwhelming. For a few moments in the dim light of the foyer, there were no packs, no debts, no species barriers, just fire. Dominic pulled back abruptly, gasping for air. His eyes were glowing a brilliant, terrifying gold. Go to your room, he ordered, his voice strained to the breaking point. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone, especially me. He turned and stormed toward the west wing, leaving Genevieve trembling in the hallway, her lips swollen and her world tilted on its axis. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was brittle. Dominic was nowhere to be seen. Garrison met Genevieve in the study, his expression grimmer than usual. He held a manila folder. The results of the background check you ordered, sir. Garrison said to the empty chair behind the desk before realizing Dominic wasn't there. He looked at Genevieve. Where is the Alpha? I don't know. She stammered, blushing as she remembered the night before. Garrison sighed. Miss Caldwell, this information is sensitive, but given your proximity to the Alpha, you need to know. He opened the folder. Your father was a human gambler, but your mother, her line is interesting. Your maternal grandmother wasn't human. She was a null. Genevieve frowned. A what? A genetic anomaly in the shifter world. Someone born with wolf blood but without the ability to shift. They are rare, and they possess a unique scent marker that is incredibly soothing to dominant alphas. It acts as a natural anchor to their humanity. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. Why Dominic hadn't killed her that first night in the West Wing, why he kept her close, why he was so volatile around her. It's not real, she whispered, horrified. What he feels, it's just biology. I'm just a human tranquilizer. It is more complicated than that. Garrison said, but before he could explain, an alarm began to blare throughout the estate. Red emergency lights flashed. Garrison immediately pulled a sidearm from under his jacket. Perimeter breach. He snapped into his radio. Multiple hostiles. Sector 4. What's happening? Genevieve cried. Rogue wolves, hired mercenaries. They've broken through the southern gate. Garrison grabbed her arm. We need to get you to the safe room now. They ran through the halls. The sounds of gunfire and inhuman roaring echoed from outside. They reached the heavy steel door of the safe room just as the windows at the end of the hallway shattered inward. 3 massive wolves leaped through the broken glass. They weren't majestic like Dominic. They were mangy, scarred, and rabid-looking. Their eyes were red with bloodlust. Garrison shoved Genevieve behind him and opened fire. He took down the first wolf, but the other 2 slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. His gun skittered across the floor. One of the wolves, a massive gray beast with half an ear missing, turned its attention to Genevieve. It snarled, saliva dripping from its jaws, and stalked toward her. She backed up until she hit the wall. She was going to die. Here in this hallway, paying for her father's mistakes. The wolf lunged. Genevieve squeezed her eyes shut and screamed. A roar shook the very foundations of the house. A black blur tore down the hallway, moving faster than anything natural. Dominic, in full wolf form, hit the gray rogue midair. Dominic's wolf was a nightmare construct. He was easily twice the size of the rogue's, his fur jet black, his eyes glowing like coals. The violence was instantaneous and brutal. Dominic didn't just fight, he obliterated. He tore the throat out of the gray wolf in one savage motion, tossing the carcass aside like a rag doll. The remaining rogue turned to run, but Dominic was on in a second, breaking its spine with a sickening crunch. Silence fell over the hallway, broken only by Garrison's pained groans and Genevieve's terrified sobbing. The massive black wolf turned slowly toward Genevieve. His muzzle was stained with fresh blood. He stalked toward her, his ears flattened. She was paralyzed with fear. This was the monster everyone warned her about, the killer. He stopped inches from her. He huffed, his hot breath hitting her face. Then he did something impossibly gentle. He nudged her hand with his wet nose, whining softly. He was checking on her. The air around them began to shimmer, distorted by heat. The black wolf seemed to fold in on itself, bones cracking and reshaping. It was a gruesome, agonizing process to watch. Slowly, Dominic, the man, emerged from the beast. He was naked, covered in blood and dust, his chest heaving. He looked at Genevieve, his human eyes wide with a terrifying realization. The adrenaline had cleared the fog. The moment he had seen that wolf lunging for her, something inside him had shattered and reformed. It wasn't just the null blood. It wasn't just lust. The bond snapped into place, ancient and undeniable, connecting their souls with a force that nearly brought him to his knees. Mine. He gasped, his voice a wrecked growl. He reached out his bloodied hand, grasping her shoulder, pulling her against his naked chest. You are mine. Mate. Genevieve was too shocked to speak. She looked over his shoulder at the carnage in the hallway, then up into the eyes of the man who had just slaughtered for her. The man who was now claiming her with a look of absolute terrifying devotion. The bond had awakened, and there was no going back. Genevieve woke up in a bed that felt like a cloud wrapped in sheets of Egyptian cotton that smelled unmistakably of him, cedar, rain, and raw masculine heat. She sat up with a gasp, the memories of the previous night crashing down on her. The gunfire, the blood, the massive black wolf, and Dominic's single guttural word. Mate! She wasn't in her small servant's room anymore. She was in the master suite. The door opened, and Dominic walked in. He was dressed in fresh clothes, dark jeans, and a black sweater, but he looked exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his movements were tight controlled. He carried a silver tray with breakfast, a domestic gesture that looked absurdly out of place for a man who had ripped a throat out with his teeth hours ago. Eat, he said, placing the tray on the nightstand. You need your strength. Genevieve pulled the sheet up to her chin. Where am I? Where is Garrison? Garrison is in surgery. He'll live. Dominic said, his voice clipped. You are in my room and you are staying here. The estate is on lockdown. No one enters, no one leaves. You can't keep me prisoner, Dominic. He turned on her, his eyes flashing. I can and I will. Someone bypassed my security codes, Genevieve. The rogues didn't just break in, they were let in. We have a traitor in the house. Until I find them, you don't leave my sight. Because I'm your mate? She tested the word, feeling foolish. Dominic froze. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He looked at her with a mixture of longing and frustration. You know what that means now. Garrison told you about the null blood. He said I'm a tranquilizer. Genevieve said bitterly, looking away. That I'm a genetic anomaly that makes you feel calm. Is that what mate means to you? A biological stress ball? Dominic reached out, grabbing her chin and forcing her to look at him. His touch was gentle but unyielding. Do not insult us like that, he growled low. Yes, your blood quiets the noise. For years my head has been a war zone. The beast is always scratching at the door, demanding violence. With you, there is silence, but that is not why I claimed you. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I claimed you because you ran toward me when I was a monster, because you stood up to your sisters to protect my reputation, because you are the only thing in this cold, empty kingdom that feels real. The biology opened the door, Genevieve, but you are the one who walked through it. Genevieve felt her defenses crumbling. She wanted to believe him, but before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. It was Mrs. Holloway. The older woman looked pale, her hands shaking as she clutched a tablet. Alpha, she said, her voice trembling. We found the breach log. The security codes were accessed from inside the guest wing at 2:00 a.m. Clear's throat. Dominic stood up, his demeanor instantly shifting from lover to killer. Who was in the guest wing? No one, sir. The wing has been empty since the gala guests left. Mrs. Holloway swallowed hard. except the service entrance near the wing was accessed by a temporary keycard, a card issued to the cleaning staff. Dominic turned to Genevieve, his expression unreadable. Your sisters? No, Genevieve whispered, horrified. They're cruel, Dominic, but they wouldn't help rogues kill people. Desperation makes people do terrible things. Dominic said coldly, and hate makes them do worse. He walked to the closet and pulled out a tactical vest, strapping it over his chest. I'm going to find them. Stay here, lock the door. I'm coming with you, Genevieve said, throwing off the covers. She was still wearing her ruined dress from the night before. Absolutely not. If it's my sisters, she said, standing tall despite her fear, then it's my mess. And if they did this, I need to hear them say it. I need to know why they hate me enough to want me dead. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, seeing the steel in her hazel eyes. He nodded once. Stay behind me. If I tell you to run, you run. They didn't find the sisters at the Caldwell house. The shabby home was abandoned, drawers pulled open, clothes scattered. They had packed in a hurry. Dominic's trackers traced their scent, mixed with the distinct rancid smell of rogue wolves, to an abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of the territory, near the foggy cliffs of the coastline. The mill was a skeletal structure of rusting iron and rotting wood, looming out of the mist. Dominic parked the SUV a mile away to avoid detection. He moved through the forest like a shadow, with Genevieve struggling to keep up with his silent, predatory pace. Inside the main warehouse of the mill, the scene was like a tribunal. Beatrice and Loretta were there, huddled near a rusty saw blade, looking terrified. Surrounding them were a dozen armed men mercenaries, and a man sitting on a crate, casually peeling an apple with a hunting knife. It was Alpha Kale of the grim outcast Northern Pack. He was a man known for his brutality, a rival Dominic had exiled years ago for hunting humans for sport. We did what you asked, Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. We gave you the codes. You said you'd just scare him. You said you'd get the debt cancelled and give us the deed to the house. I said many things, Kale replied smoothly, flicking a piece of apple skin onto the dirty floor. But plans change. Your little sister survived the assault, and Dominic, well, he's harder to kill than a cockroach. We want our money, Loretta cried. We want to leave. Kale stood up, towering over them. You aren't going anywhere. You are the bait. From the shadows of the catwalks above, Dominic whispered to Genevieve. Stay here. I'm going to take out the perimeter guards. When the shooting starts, you run back to the car. No, Genevieve whispered back, her hand gripping his arm. If you go down there, they'll kill you. It's a trap, Dominic. He wants you to attack. I don't have a choice, he murmured, his eyes fixed on Kale. He has civilians. They aren't civilians, she said, her voice shaking with a painful realization. They are traitors, but they are still my blood. Before Dominic could stop her, Genevieve stood up. Stay down, he hissed, but it was too late. Kale. Genevieve shouted, her voice ringing out through the mill. Every head turned. Kale looked up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his scarred face. Ah, Kale clapped his hands. The guest of honor and right on time. Clears throat, Genevieve. Beatrice gasped, looking up with wide, tear-filled eyes. Run, he's crazy, let them go. Genevieve called out, walking down the metal stairs, her hands raised. She could feel Dominic's fury radiating from the shadows behind her, but she prayed he would wait for the right moment. It's me you want. I'm the one Dominic cares about. They're nothing to him. True, Kale mused, signaling his men to hold their fire. But they were useful. They hated you so much, Genevieve. It was so easy to twist that envy. Why does she get to live in the castle while you rot in poverty? Why does the king look at her and not you? He walked toward her, grabbing her by the hair and pulling her close. He sniffed her neck. And now I see why. You smell quiet like the void. No wonder he keeps you. You silence the beast. Kale pulled a gun from his waistband and pressed it to Genevieve's temple. Come out, Blackwood, or I paint the walls with your pet's brains. The shadows exploded. Dominic didn't shift. There wasn't room. He dropped from the catwalk like a dark, avenging angel, landing directly on top of two mercenaries. The sound of breaking bones echoed like gunshots. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire flashed in the dim light. Dominic was a blur of violence, moving faster than human eyes could track. He used the mercenaries as shields, snapping necks and disarming men with efficient, brutal precision. Kale snarled, dragging Genevieve backward. Kill him. Kill him now. Beatrice and Loretta scrambled away, hiding behind a pile of lumber. Dominic was fighting his way toward Genevieve, but he was outnumbered. A mercenary struck him in the shoulder with a crowbar, and another shot him in the leg. Dominic roared, stumbling but not falling. He ripped the throat out of the man with the crowbar using his bare hands, but he was slowing down. Clear's throat, he was bleeding. Kale laughed, tightening his grip on Genevieve. Look at him. The great Alpha King, dying for a mudblood servant. Genevieve saw Dominic falter. She saw the light in his eyes dimming as the pain took over. He was losing control. If he shifted now, wounded and surrounded, they would slaughter him. She had to do something. She remembered what Garrison said. Your scent is an anchor. She didn't try to pull away from Kale. Instead, she closed her eyes and focused on the bond she had felt the night before. That golden thread connecting her to Dominic. Dominic, she screamed silently in her mind. Focus on me. She reached back and drove her elbow into Kale's ribs, not to hurt him, but to surprise him. As he grunted, loosening his grip for a fraction of a second, she dropped to the ground, pulling a hidden canister from her pocket, the verbena spray her sisters had given her weeks ago. She had kept it. She sprayed it directly into Kale's eyes. Kale screamed, blinding pain searing his enhanced vision. He dropped the gun, clawing at his face. Dominic, she screamed. Dominic looked up. He saw her break free. The sight of her safe, even for a second, gave him the surge he needed. The wolf and the man synchronized. He lunged across the gap, tackling Kale into the rusty machinery. The fight between Kale and Dominic was short and vicious. Kale was strong, but he was fighting for power. Dominic was fighting for his mate. Dominic slammed Kale against a steel pillar, his forearm crushing Kale's windpipe. You touched her. Dominic snarled, his eyes glowing so bright they illuminated the dark corner. You put your hands on my queen. She's human. Kale choked out, his face turning purple. She is my soul, Dominic whispered. With a sickening crunch, Dominic ended the threat. Kale's body slumped to the floor. Silence returned to the mill, heavy and thick. The surviving mercenaries, seeing their leader dead and the Alpha King standing over the body covered in blood, dropped their weapons and fled into the night. Dominic stood there, chest heaving, blood soaking his shirt. He turned slowly to look at Genevieve. She ran to him. Clear's throat, he collapsed into her arms, his heavy weight dragging them both to the dusty floor. You're hurt, she sobbed, pressing her hands against the bullet wound in his leg. I'll heal. He rasped, his hand coming up to cup her face, smearing blood on her cheek. Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? I'm fine, she whispered, kissing his forehead. I'm fine. Clear's throat, a sound of shuffling drew their attention. Beatrice and Loretta crept out from behind the lumber. They looked at the scene, the dead bodies, the blood, the terrifying Alpha, and then at Genevieve. Jenny, Beatrice whimpered, we didn't know he would hurt you. We just wanted the money. Dominic snarled, trying to stand up, his killing instinct flaring again. Clear's throat, get them out of my sight before I tear them apart. Genevieve placed a hand on his chest, calming him. She stood up and walked over to her sisters. She didn't look like the servant girl anymore. She looked like the woman who had just helped kill a warlord. You sold me, Genevieve said, her voice ice cold, for a house, for debt. We're family. Loretta cried. Please tell him to let us go. You aren't family, Genevieve said. Family protects each other. You are strangers. She turned to Dominic. Do what you want with the debt, but I never want to see them again. Clear's throat, exile them. If they step foot in Seattle, let the pack hunt them. Dominic nodded, his eyes hard. Done. The sisters screamed as Garrison, who had arrived with the backup security team, dragged them away. Their cries faded into the distance, leaving Genevieve standing in the silence of the mill. Dominic limped over to her. He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. It's over, he said. Is it? She asked, looking up at him. The debt is paid. My sisters are gone. I have nothing keeping me here anymore. Dominic went rigid. Fear, real fear, entered his eyes for the first time. You want to leave? Genevieve looked at the man who would burn the world for her. She felt the bond humming in her chest, warm and golden and permanent. I don't have anywhere to go, she said softly, unless you have a job opening. Maybe something less maid and more partner. Dominic let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the day they met. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of vanilla and rain that silenced his demons. You are not a partner, Genevieve. He murmured against her skin. You are the queen, and this is your home, forever. 6 months later. The summer solstice gala was different this year. The ballroom was the same, the guests were the same high society shifters, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was no tension, no sneering. When the doors opened, Dominic Blackwood walked in. Clear's throat, he looked healthier. The lines of stress gone from his face, and on his arm was Genevieve. She wasn't wearing a drab gray dress. She wore a gown of shimmering gold that matched the Alpha's eyes. She didn't walk with her head down, she walked with her chin up, her gaze sweeping the room with a calm confidence. As they moved through the crowd, Alphas bowed, not just out of fear of Dominic but out of respect for her. They had heard the stories. They knew she was the Null who had tamed the king. Clear's throat, they knew she had stood in a burning mill and fought for her mate. Dominic leaned down, whispering in her ear, "They're all looking at you." "Let them look." Genevieve smiled, squeezing his hand. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Dominic smiled back, a rare true smile that reached his eyes. The beast was finally sleeping. The king had his queen. And for the first time in history, the Blackwood pack was truly at peace. And that is the story of Genevieve and the Alpha King. Clear's throat, she was meant to be a sacrifice, a pawn in a game of jealousy and greed. But true strength isn't about claws or fangs. It's about the courage to stand in the fire for the one you love. Genevieve didn't just tame the beast. She saved the man. If this story made your heart race, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more romances like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. I post new dramas every week. What do you think? Was Genevieve right to exile her sisters, or should she have forgiven them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.